you're excused.
Hello, this is the Creatively Unworthy Podcast.
Hello, I'm Larry Chambers.
I'm Rebecca Spencer, and
Or your host.
this is our first episode.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about what creatively unworthy means.
And how that affects you as an artist, because it's kind of who we're talking to is the creatively unworthy. And what that really means is if you're not making millions of dollars, if you're not working for a Wall Street firm, if you're not in academia headed for a PhD, if you don't own a $3 million mansion, have a beautiful husband or a beautiful new wife, with large breasts, by the way, for the older American males.
Oh, we might get demonetized for that.
You're not worthy, because that really sets the standards for America, is to be rich and then have a beautiful 2.1 children and a beautiful wife with large breasts. And once you're there, then nobody can attack you. You think blah 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 blah. But we're the other side of that coin. We're the creative part of that society. And what I found is, like so many creative people, they're dyslexic, they're ADD, they're weird, they don't have college degrees lots of times. And there's a struggle because you need time to develop your skills, and you're not going to compete in our society unless you graduate from school and have be able to spell your name and have a certain amount of I want to say credibility in that area. But it's how you get there. So part of this, I believe, my why kind of in doing this is to answer the problem. And the problem is really, you need time to develop your talent, you need emotional support to get through difficult periods, and you need a pathway and a vocabulary that speaks to you. So that's kind of what this is about. So I guess we could start by Rebecca telling us your ADD, or your story about being ADD in school. You're in school now.
Yeah.
Obviously graduated a long time ago.
Yeah. But I also wanted to say, I think I find it interesting that our dynamic is you're already a practiced artist and you've been through a whole bunch, and I'm like just starting out and getting into the.
Yeah, and that's how this thing really came about. Was you're my eye doctor's daughter, and I'd sent him something, or we all had lunch one day, and I listened to you and I thought, wow. And he told me that you were dyslexic and stuff, and you had the story, and I said, why don't you send me like volumes of this story, and I'm like, oh my God.
I'm so sorry about.
Yeah,
I feel like I was always
this
spamming your inbox.
That is what I'm talking about. You're unworthy, the creatively unworthy. We do not feel that we're worthy to have anybody review our stuff, or, oh my God, say that it's good. I mean, I can remember almost to the day in third grade, and this was back in the 50s, and I did this drawing and entered this contest. It was in San Francisco, so there was a lot of grammar schools, and I won, and it was on television, and it was this picture. And back in the day, the teacher would wheeled in this television set, black and white, hook it up, and there was my picture. And I remember the smartest girl in the school, her name was Barbara Bunn. She became my nemesis in grammar school.
Of course.
Of course, she turned to me and said, artists are all gay, they don't make any money.
No.
And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. Thanks for the encouragement, because she was the one that got all the accolades. She could read at a sixth grade level when she was in the fourth grade. She was just like this amazing. And because she was so good, she became the teacher's pet and the spy. And she would
the spy. I love that.
Yeah.
That's so true, because
So
kids
true.
do.
And she would come around and go, why are you so dumb? How come you can't, I couldn't even read at the fourth grade level. I mean, I was reading at like, if they had a minus second grade level or something, I was probably there. But nobody knew what dyslexic was. They had no concept that being dyslexic was actually one of the more smarter kids in the school. Like, to
More smarter.
more smarter. Yeah.
That's
Okay.
perfect. That's
More
perfect.
smarter.
No,
I'm more smarter than a lot of people. But what
I
happens
mean, watch
is
all the
that,
comments are gonna comment on that, but
well,
I
what
feel like we
happens,
should mention like Larry's like he's
real smart.
he's real smart. Yeah,
I've got I've got a bunch of degrees and all that kind
got a
of,
bunch of degrees under his belt. He's written things like you're,
50 books, published books.
but
Stuff.
I know that's perfect. I feel like that goes to show it's not exactly how you talk or how you read. It's I don't know, like skill and intelligence. Is it just measured by
By one,
just those little things like a lot
yeah.
of people think they are?
Well, and that's really what started me on this quest like 20 years ago. I wanted to find out, what, why I am this way. And I found out, yeah, I was dyslexic. I took the Woodcock's battery of tests and found out I was also really off the scales in conceptual understanding and all these other matrix that are not measured in school, but that this particular test measures it. And I also decided to dig into what is dyslexia and and ADD, because I was that way too, real fidgety in the back of the class.
Yeah.
And I found that that we need to have visual work when we're little kids, back third grade. There's a list of 255 non-visual words, and they're all like and, the, but, they're there. I still have to think about when I write there. Is it they are, or they're over there, or is it that belongs to them?
Yeah.
I have to stop.
Here,
Think about
here.
it. Yeah, and I still have to go A B C D E F G. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah.
Oh my god.
No, I do, and yet
No, I do too.
it's
I do
terrible.
too. That's this.
And reading would be like this for me, with Barbara Bunn standing, and we called her the spelling police. I would
Oh, I bet she was.
have to read out loud, and what you would find yourself doing is trying to go down the little primer to find a visual word, and then your mind would put it together. So in reality, our type of thinking is high speed. We're high speed visual thinkers, and so I didn't understand what that meant, and really dug into it to find out more. And that's kind of the things that we're going to cover in this podcast is how that oh, here's the bottom line in all this. I found also through now almost 20 years of having this great therapist that I worked with over the years, that my mind was working perfectly. My mind is working perfect when I was in school, and I would get frozen on something, or I would, like couldn't spell something, and then I would be almost like in a frozen state, like that.
Yeah.
What
Like it's not
that,
a disability. It's like your body's natural response
yeah,
for different sorts of things.
and if you go back far enough, you find that ability was part of our survival, fight or flight. Like, this is dangerous. So for me, school was dangerous. Dangerous, like it was embarrassing, therefore it was dangerous. I'd be made fun,
Yeah.
I
For
can't
like
tell
a
you.
kid, like that's your biggest worry is getting
Yeah.
embarrassed.
And so here's the true story. In the third grade, I got called to the nurse's office, and I took a bunch of these tests, and I didn't know why, and I didn't know there was anything wrong or anything like that. And she said, and then the teacher came in and they had a big discussion. And of course, Barbara Bunn found out about it. How she knew, I have no idea, but that I was going to be held back. This is the kiss of death. When you're in the third grade and couldn't understand why was I being held back. Back in those days, we had, in the 50s, we had kids that were called retarded that were in our class. We had two kids that were retarded. They didn't have distinctions about that back then. It was a place for them to sit. They got promoted to the fourth grade, and I was going to be held back. And so what did that mean to me? stupid. I was dumber than a retarded kid. That was my belief system at the time. But the other problem was back then, I had a girlfriend. I was like kind of cute, I guess, and as a little kid,
Oh, in third grade.
third grade, and I
Pretty.
had the best looking girlfriend
Mm.
then, which all it meant was that I wrote her name on the board, on something,
Yeah.
and she saw it, and it was like
And
that.
went, ooh.
Yeah,
Oh my
and
god.
there was no way that I was going to be. I realized that no fourth grader, because she would get promoted to fourth grade, would be seen with the third grade kid that was dumber than a retard.
No.
So I decided, but I was supposed to take home a note to my mother. Luckily, she never read any of that stuff or took too much interest in my school. And I took the note home, and it was the first forgery I ever did. I got her checkbooks, all she wrote, Mrs. Chambers, I signed it, do not hold back. I wrote, in her handwriting. And I took the note back. It was my first delve into the criminal world. And
Oh my gosh.
I got promoted.
Did the police ever find out about that?
And I hate to put this out there because it could, undo everything that I've done.
Yeah. They might make you go back and do the third grade again.
I hate
They'll
that.
hear it.
Here's another thing that they don't tell you when you're dyslexic. How many people are dyslexic? Once I started to talk about this, like I went to college and I had this football coach and he was like my hero. And I talked to him a few years ago and he said, oh yeah, I was dyslexic. And I had this, he made friends with this girl that could spell and he made sure that
Wow.
she walked home safe where they lived, and she helped him with his homework. And then I one time I interviewed this head of, this is up in Montana, I won't say this city, Billings, and he was the head of this hospital. I mean, he was the head, surgeon of this hospital. And he told me, yeah, I was dyslexic, I had really difficult time. And because I said, one of the things that a lot of professionals won't tell you is that they had to cheat to get by, because I had to, because I would rather die than have anybody know that I couldn't spell or I couldn't read.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, I had the same problem. And he goes, the only thing is I don't tell people about it because what are they going to think? That I'm a doctor and I cheated and now I'm the head of this, prominent clinic or hospital.
Yeah.
They might send me back to the third grade, the very thing that you said. So
Yeah.
these are issues that as an adult, as somebody, I'm like now 73, ouch. And I've gone through all these years of a number of years of hiding, covering that up, and actually driven to be smart, driven to be thought of as smart. Because if I get all the accolades, if I get a master's degree, if I get all of this stuff, if I have a great job, if I'm making a ton of money, no one will dare question me. Hey, are you kind of a dumb guy? They're not going to like look at my grade, the grade.
Yeah. They're not gonna look at all the books you've written and be like,
Those are
oh
all good.
wow,
Yeah.
that guy must be a doofus, or
Yeah. They're not allowed to think that because I've entered into the world of academia's sacred grounds, the writer,
yeah.
and just to show you, I just put this in a paper that I was working on about the most, let me see if I can find it and read it to you, but it's like the most prominent most, okay, oh, here it is. Why are Oxford psychologists some of the most formative talkers? Words tumble out rapidly. Sometimes, I have a hard time reading this. It's syntactically
Oh my
correct.
god, you have a hard time reading this?
Yeah, their emphasis on grammatical correct speech patterns is so extreme. The tone of their voice has the hallmark of an Oxford professor. But the bottom line is they emphasize speaking because of the academic fear that committing anything to print could be objectively judged. So they'd rather not do it. So that's the big fear that the academics have. And
I love that too. It's
so
like,
and
I
there's
don't
one of
know.
the things that we'll do is I've defined all of these things that have helped me, which I want to help you.
Yeah.
in your future.
And anybody listening.
Well, you, when I say you, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm very smart. And so I'm going to use words like hunter farmer, convergent, divergent thinkers, and those things, and especially hunter farmer, because that's a shorthand for those of us that are creatively unworthy that we get to use.
We should explain those terms though
Okay.
for anybody listening at home.
A hunter is
And
not some gun-toting guy out in the fields, trying to kill deer or something. A hunter is hunter farmer. It's a metaphor to explain our type of brain. So we're the hunters. We're out. The creative hunter is, out.
it'd be like the top of the class kid versus the guy if you dropped in the middle of the woods who would survive longer.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Like some people just have that brain where they're more
Mhm.
situational.
Barbara Bunn would die in the jungle, and I thrived in the jungle. Actually, when I was actually in the Vietnam War, and I moved from the back of the class to the head of the class, and I actually got a combat promotion to sergeant. I went as a private to sergeant because of I knew things. My brain came alive. My hunter brain. I had intuition. I knew it's like I knew when the enemy, where they would be and how many there were, what was going to happen ahead of time. And so I walked point on a ranger team. I was a U.S. Army Ranger. And then, I come back to the States, and suddenly that kind of information isn't desired, or, the hunter brain isn't needed. I go into the university system surrounded by farmers, the farmer. So I call a farmer, and it sounds demeaning, but I don't mean farmer like some old guy milking cows. Like there's nothing wrong with milking cows. I milk cows.
Yeah. It's just like the mindset of somebody who can remember dates and like very good at reading, very good at academia, kind of.
I like to think of it as somebody that's good at picking bugs off leaves. You can do it all day long. There's whole cultures of farmers. And when you think of it, one of the big ones is China, Vietnam, any of these countries that has this intense need for conformity and for, this ability to sit for long periods of time without and not be distracted. You and I, it's very difficult for us to sit for long periods of time. As I get older, I can do it, but you know how hard that is, right?
I'm sure the audience has noticed this conversation kind of just like
scatters
everywhere.
I actually just heard
that's what happens when two ADHD people get together. Audience.
I just read this study, and it was about they did this test to was a comparison of there we go. I just lost.
Yeah.
That's okay. I'll think of it again.
That's all right.
But it's kind of germane to this topic of hunters and farmers. Anyway, the term might sound derogatory. It's meant to be derogatory.
No, don't say that. We'll be canceled.
For the
our first podcast.
Yeah. Well,
our first podcast, and we're already canceled.
They have been my nemesis my whole life, and I haven't had. And they can attack me, but I'm not allowed to attack them. And I'm at the stage of life that fuck it, I don't really care. I'll, what are they going to do? Send me back to, dysfunctional school? But the farmers have been shaming us our whole lives. And what I mean by that, they're nice people, but they don't realize what they're doing. Most like school teachers, classic farmer. And I'm going to get into explain, really what that means is that again, it's about this ability to sit and learn things. And what this podcast is about is to give you motivation to have the time to learn and get through, to get through school and not feel like a dumb shit. Several years ago, it was in 2009, I got invited to go back to Paterson, New Jersey, and I got to speak to 250 of the student body, 250 kids that have all, they were there because they lashed out. And then almost all of them were ADD and dyslexic. And just like if you go look in the criminal system and in jails, almost on prisons, almost everybody in there is ADD.
Yeah.
ADD. They lash
Hyperactive
out.
with nowhere to go. All that
They la-
energy.
and they lash out. They don't have a governor on that. And so these, matter of fact, one of the kids, they told me one of the kids was absent because he had murdered somebody. It was like that, Patterson.
Ooh. Yeah,
And
no.
so I got up
Is
and
that an excused absence though? Is that okay?
you're so
Yeah.
oh, that's the kind of humor I love. So I got up and here I'm like this old white guy, speaking to predominantly brown and black student body, and like I'm going to try to win them over. They've heard all of this, stuff
Yeah.
before, blah 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 blah. But
Do better in school, kids.
yeah, all that crap. And what I can remember when I hooked them was when I described being in the war and seeing somebody dead and what that was like. And it was just like they were like really intently listening because that had they had experienced a lot of stuff like that a lot of white people never experienced in their lives. And so I related to them and they related to me. And then I had fun with it because I said, look, I'm the guy that was in the back of the room and all this kind of stuff like you. I didn't get kicked out of school. Well, yeah, I did. I got kicked out of my English class, but in high school for talking, of course.
Yeah.
Um, I said, I'm going to do a little experiment with you guys. Okay, so I'm going to say, watch, because I knew that I could see in the side of the room, the auditorium, the teachers were all over on one side, kind of, some were listening, some weren't, and they were all kind of talking amongst themselves. So I said, you guys watch this. Hey, how many of you are, have a published book? No hands went up. How many of you have any of you ever published an article? And no, but I think one hand went up. And I said, I'm like them. I mean, I'm dyslexic and ADD, and I've got 50 books and maybe 1,000 articles published. And they were like, what is he talking about? I don't get it. And I said, I just kind of wanted to show you that your teachers aren't as smart as they think they are, because they hold up getting published as, and not that there's anything wrong with teachers. There's a lot of really, my son,
Yeah.
teacher, there's nothing wrong with
My special ed teacher was actually really awesome. I had to commend any of my teachers, even though being in special ed, I feel like is kind of inappropriate for.
It is inappropriate. Just that term,
Yeah.
special ed, that shames you. And that's what I meant by my teachers shame me. I can't tell you how many times I stood up against the blackboard with my nose on the spot on the blackboard for hours at a time, or had to write shit on the wall and had to do all this kind of stuff. And I finally, like I said, in the 4th grade, I gave up and I just decided, rather than go through the humiliation, I'll cheat. And I became great at it. I mean, I could be writing something and looking sideways at somebody else's test, and I got through. And it wasn't until I was probably it wasn't until junior college. That's where those of us go that are not great students go, to
That's where I am right
community
now.
college. Yes,
It's great. It's
yeah,
cheap.
it's cheap. It's where we go. And I learned how to read. And my very first college test, the blue book test, and it was an essay thing, and I flunked. I got an F. But our teacher, who was also a coach, told us, "Look, we'll give you another chance." And he actually gave me a tutor. And this guy showed me. And this is after all of high school and all of grammar school. Some kid on the football team took me under his wing. He was like a year older than I was. So I was 17, he was 18 or 19 or something. And we went to the library, which was one of the first times I'd ever been in a library. And he showed me how the library worked in 5 minutes. And by describing how the ones, I can't remember exactly what it was, but how it led through history all the way through. And so he described that to me using visual words, which I understood. And then he said, look, when you want to uh, what I could read by then a little pretty good, but I didn't have comprehension. I couldn't remember what I was reading. So I said, okay. So we go into this booth and you could then get music, like classical music, put on classical music, which I didn't realize was kind of opening up my prefrontal cortex, and it was
Getting your creative side, kind of.
getting the juices flowing. And he goes, now I want you to do is read, because the thing I'd flunked was like on the Civil War or something. I want you to pretend like you're in the Civil War. You're next to this general. So I was next to, Grant, and I still remember the name. And said, just as you're reading this, visualize yourself being there. And I did. And I took the test, and I got a B on it. It was a semester, like the midterm. So I got a midterm B in college. I was blown away.
That's
It wasn't supposed
amazing.
to happen, and I didn't cheat. The big thing was I didn't cheat, but I couldn't run around going like, guess what? I didn't cheat. And I got hey, how are you doing? Like to meet you today. And I didn't cheat on this test. And then
It's your
I did.
teacher? She's like, what? Wait, what did you just say?
So then the big step, because everybody knows in order to, and this is deliberately designed this way by your threshold guardian farmers, you have to take a math class to graduate from college, to get a graduate, to get.
Sorry, not to interrupt you, but I also want to say logic brain versus creative brain, kind of too. Just to keep repeating the terms so people.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah.
So I decided I had to take this math class. So I took trigonometry, and I don't know if it still goes this way for you guys, but for my generation, I could clear a room out by saying the word trigonometry. Trigonometry. Hello, I'm going to take trigonometry. People go like, I don't know. I'm very stupid. I don't know what that means. I'm going to hell. So I had a really great. Now this is back to the different types of brains, and I don't want to get into too deep, but he was a visual teacher, my trigonometry teacher, and trigonometry can be very visual. And he said something like, you can measure a distance to that mountain, and you can then measure the height of that mountain, and you can know, you can figure out, how do you say it, like the angle, or you could, if you knew the angle you could shoot an angle to the top of that mountain, and if you knew the distance of the mountain, there's this formula that shows you the height of the mountain. And I went like, oh my God, no one ever explained it to me that way. So there was this practical app. I got an A in trigonometry. I got an A. And then I ended up graduating a junior college. We call it junior college, call it community college. I got an A degree, and I graduated with high honors or something like that. But here's the problem, because I needed more time to kind of like do the classes. I lowered my my class schedule from, it was like 15 units to 12, and immediately got a draft notice. Back then, in those days, it was like they had spies, and farmers were out,
They were waiting.
Nixon's farmers.
2 more units down, and
let's see, this guy is taken only 12 units, and it immediately made me 1A, which that meant I was eligible for the draft. But being creative, I contacted my draft board, and I cut a deal with them. Probably nobody even knows that you could do that. I said, look, let me, because I still had another semester to get the degree. If you'll let me graduate, I'll volunteer for the draft. You don't have to find me. I won't go to Canada. I'll just I want to go anyway, because I think it's the right thing to do, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay. So they cut me a deal, and once I graduated, then I volunteered. But I have tons, as you do, things about school that at the time would have been embarrassing to say. I would have never said it, but now I don't give it. Like I said, I don't care what people think. I'm at this age where, what are you going to do? Like send me back to Vietnam? huh, I already went there. I love it. I go back all the time. Matter of fact, I lived there for the last 10 years, Vietnam and Cambodia.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I use the terms hunter farmer as a kind of and taught you that. You liked it so much.
Yeah, I do love the terms.
I
And he's
used it
writing a book on it,
shorthand.
guys.
Well,
Isn't
that's
that cool?
kind of where this is going. It's shorthand for you're the hunter and there's the farmers, and there's nothing wrong with farmers. They're good people. And you'll find out as you start connecting the dots in this that here's an example. Last or 2 years ago, Steven Spielberg came out as a dyslexic. He came out of the closet. He was dyslexic. I knew he was dyslexic like 20 years ago. And how I knew it was because of his farmer that he had, Kathleen Kennedy. She's like, if you go back and look at all the Steven Spielberg movies, you'll always see underneath his name as an associate producer of Kathleen Kennedy. And she became very famous and very rich. She was his farmer. She was the one that made sure he came across intelligent. That way he could go out there and be whatever be this super creative guy. And this is what really smart hunters do, like Richard Branson, the Virgin Airlines. He's got something like 280 companies that he runs, but he doesn't run them. He has hired farmers to run them. He's one of these smart hunters that have. Now, a lot of farmers do not, they look at that term as derogatory, but I'm sorry.
You could also say logic brain. So
Say
people
what?
don't
No,
logic brain.
we're gonna stick with
Yeah.
farmers because
I'm
It
helping
interests us.
our imaginary listeners because
Yeah,
this is our first podcast.
yes, our first responder imaginary listeners.
Yes.
And now, okay, here's another thing about hunters and farmers, and it's really simple way to understand them. Hunters need dopamine. They're dopamine deficient, and maybe at some date in the future they'll call dyslexia and ADD dopamine deficiency or something like that. That just dopamine is what turns on your prefrontal cortex and allows you to think in the classical sense. When a lot of hunters, when they're kids like myself, when I would go to take an important test, I put the word important. Oh my God, this is the make or break test. And my mind would go blank and I would stare at a blank pages after I couldn't even read the words. My mind was working perfect. What it did was it fight or flight. It cut off the blood flow to the brain, and it went into the part of the brain that is the fight or flight. I can't remember what the name of that function is, but there's no memory in that part of the brain. So I'd look at these test questions, and I had no memory of anything because I was in fight or flight. I didn't know that. Nobody ever taught that. My great hunter, my great farmer teachers didn't know that either. It's just that matter of fact, I like to brag about my ACT test that I took, my college entrance exam was so low, they didn't even return it to me. It was like, I mean, what I believe is that they pinned it on the SAT wall, for the lowest scores ever received. I don't know, but the farm. Let's see where's it going with that. So the farmers are dopamine surplus, and this really came clear to me. In other words, they don't need a lot of dopamine to stay focused and think clearly. This really became clear to me when I was in Vietnam, because most of us guys out in the jungle were hunters, and guys in the rear, not all, but a lot of the guys that were in the back, we called in the rear, like the officers and so forth, they were farmers. Well, one of these guys came into our unit, and he was this super smart guy, smarter than all of us combined. And he wanted to go out into, on alert team, on our ranger team.
Yeah.
And after a while, we took him with us. And there's even the, modern day rangers will tell this, nobody knows who's going to freak under the conditions of combat. But as alert team, you're behind enemy lines. You're constantly surrounded by enemy soldiers. That's what you do. You're out
You
there.
could get shot like at any time.
Oh, at any second.
Yeah.
And this guy literally freaked out, and he ended up shooting one of our own guys in the head, and we got rid of him because he was overwhelmed by this. He had too much dopamine. For me, it was great. In the jungle, I was at home, I was like, yes, why didn't somebody tell me this before? I mean, except for the getting
I
shot.
could just live out here.
I
It's
could live out here. I
fine.
love
Yeah.
this, I'm at home. But for my farmer friends, it was like he went into shock. I mean,
Yeah.
and it was so obvious that
And it's not that he was
Overwhelmed.
stupid. He was brilliant.
Oh, he was
Just
brilliant.
like not in this way, not in this skill set.
That was his skill set. And of course,
Yeah.
he was shamed for it, which is one of the only times a farmer would ever get shamed or something like that.
Yeah.
And we were promoted for it, for having that ability. And I became, like I said, a sergeant in 6 months. It takes 3 years to become a sergeant in the Army, and I got a battlefield promotion because of that. So those is an example of
Yeah.
why I use it.
You could even say it's kind of like the soldier mindset versus the scholar mindset.
See,
Like
here's
if we
what
were to
you're
go
doing.
back 100 years, I bet that would be really useful because everybody
Yeah.
always had those armies from all the time, and now
Well,
we're
and-
like kind of peaceful where we don't have
Yeah.
as many we don't have a bunch of standing armies everywhere.
Well, and
But like
it's useful because back
600 years ago, like everybody would be like, "Wow, you're like you could defend our whole town."
yeah, and if you go back further, go back thousands of years, and the generals led the charge. The generals were
Yeah.
hunters. The generals now are farmers. It's about getting promoted, and that's kind of one of the things um, that was a downfall in like the Vietnam War is a lot of these guys were there to get in order to, we used to call it punch your ticket. They would have to do a tour in Vietnam, and then they would go from captain to major. They go back and they would lead a thing. So that was a great place for them to punch their ticket, where we were just like, we're out
Yeah.
really in it.
Actually fighting the war over here,
And as
just
a
not.
sergeant in combat, I didn't really see a lot of officers. I mean, I saw them in helicopters and I saw them in the rear, but unless they were an infantry grunt officer, most were not around. The ones that were around were hunters. These guys were like, out there and could survive in anything. And you find a lot of them were also had been enlisted men that had rose to, had got promoted to the rank of officer. Anyway, not to dwell on that. So that's why.
I think that's a really good example, though.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So I use it as it's kind of a derogatory term that us hunters get to use, that most people aren't, they're too worried about, racial things and all that kind of, things like that, to worry about our stupid hunter farmer.
Yeah.
Are
Are the poor disabled hunters who,
Yeah.
because ADHD, what is it? It's a disorder, right? We're mentally handicapped, and dyslexia too. We're broken.
And here's another an analogy that I like to use: as a bat has a disability. They're blind. They can't see. They have to fly at night. The bat is like, basically, if there was bat psychologists, they would try to teach the bat how to fly during the daylight hours.
Yeah.
So
you just need to try harder.
Need to try harder. And yet people and scientists will even say, well, the bat there's this functional ability. It has sonar and radar, and it does all of these amazing things, flying in the pitch darkness, can bounce off. It's the reason why all those folds on the bat's face and ears, those are partially the way the reflections come back of the high-pitched freak sounds that they'll send out, and it bounces off the insects, the trees, and they're able to distinguish between a stationary target, I mean the tree, and fly around it, and a moving target, which is the insect, and capture it. And it does this all with a brain that's less than an ounce.
Yeah.
It's a tiny, tiny brain, and it has no background in mathematics, geometry, or physics, and yet does these incredible calculations without even knowing it knows how to do these calculations. But that's okay, because it's a functional design.
I love that. And I listen to a lot of psychology videos, and I feel like I found the only hunter brain psychologist. He's great, but I'm not gonna mention him because a lot of people hate him right now, because
Who is he? No, you've set it up. We have to know.
No, he's very analytical, and he says things about biology that people don't like. But he was talking about like how you can play the game without knowing the rules. And if you took a bunch of kids and you had them play like tic-tac-toe together, they would, and they're like 5, 4, 3 years old, like really young kids. They could play the game with each other and none of them could know the rules, and you could take them aside and they don't try to tell you what they are and not really know.
Hmm.
Like humans and animals, just like, it's like the hunter brain thing. Like
Yeah.
they're things you can't explain. They're just kind of like
Well,
rules that we
here's
do.
here's another thing to add on to what you're saying is it wasn't that long ago people weren't educated. Really, you go back to the turn of the last century, um, people like um, we imported the German system of education into America. We brought that over, 200 years ago, and that is the Germans are very farmer-like. I mean, even today, it's like very strict and
Yeah.
they do things.
The stereotype is they don't get humor, right? Humor's
Well,
very creative.
yeah, and here's an example of German influence in our education system. Kindergarten. Kindergarten is a garden of children, of small children.
Oh my god,
It's right out of,
they need that.
German. And so this farmer mentality was laid over our setting for the things like the Industrial Revolution. We wanted to educate a workforce to be smart enough to be able to put, a washer on a bolt and have that kind of an education. And we started free education, and it wasn't out of the kindness of our hearts. It was actually to help build the economy and build things. And so this system came in, but what's happened is over the years that system has gotten out of control. In other words, the farmer is also the threshold guardian of who gets into these schools, which is always a big debate with the people. It's usually about color, because most blacks have the hunter brain. They're out. I mean, the guys that I know are like total hunters. And I don't want to get into a whole, racist thing, but when that whole thing, Black Lives Matter, when Black Lives Matter came out, and I looked at it like Black lives have always mattered. I mean, there was never even, as a hunter, it's like, duh, of course they matter, And I live in a country, I've been living in Cambodia. Everybody's brown, I'm sorry, Mr. Old White guy, but the world is brown and black, and it's not, and there's really small little bits of it that are white, but that's whole nother topic.
Yeah, we
But
should
back
probably
to,
steer clear of racial issues, or
you can't help it. You're going to get
yeah,
into it. They're there. And that's because race is, we all have a race, I think we're all the same. Anyway,
yeah,
back to the how the farmer threshold guardians are they're the gatekeepers of the universities. So if you're dyslexic, ADD, you're probably not going to get into those. You're not going to pass their tests. That's why I call them threshold guardians. And because of that, all of the graduates are going to be more onto the farmer brain type. And that is fine for, accounting and adding up everything and running big businesses, that farmer mentality. But it's not great when it comes to things like, how do you deal with race? How do you deal with those issues? Because they're coming from this either or kind of farmer mentality that is trying to, if you're on the left side, they're trying to make things over equal. If you're on the right, they're these conservatives that trying to cut whatever conservatives believe in. But there's an overabundance of this farmer thought pattern in government, in education, in politics, everything, in every part of society. And there's very little hunter brains that are allowed to get in. And, examples of it are guys that, almost all of the entrepreneurs that everybody quotes, and they always find out they're dyslexic or something, dropped out of college. College is designed so when you start, our education is designed on the German system, if I can use that term, that starts in kindergarten and goes all the way up to the highest level of intelligence, which is to become a professor. That's in that mindset. So it's always about getting the next degree, getting the advanced degree. In writers, it's about becoming, well, they'll ask me, do you have what's the term for writers, their degrees? Now I can't even think of it. FM.
Liberal arts?
No,
English?
no,
The
oh my God, everybody's laughing at us. FM,
Yeah.
you know, it's the degree that people that can't get published go and get, you know. I meet them all the time.
English?
No, not English. Creative writing, what is it? They get an FMA, that's it.
Yeah.
MA. And I think that's the right term. And I don't have one.
People who can't get published get.
Yeah, well, they can't. And
We're on to you guys.
yeah, and but they still want to be creative, and they still, you know, and their mecca is University of Iowa, you know, and the Iowa Writers Conference. That's like Harvard for writers, you know. And I've been back to those classes and had my instructors say, "Why are you even here?" You know, most of the people are there to become creative and learn. I was over creative. I get too many ideas. I need editing. I need to go to the University of Editing. You know,
That's a great place.
Yeah, how do we edit our ideas? So this is kind of our first, and we've already gone an hour, if you can believe it. Yeah. Our first kind of setup, and I probably got myself in trouble with all kinds of, you know.
Oh yeah, the internet's already on fire.
So
I'm just trying to sit here quietly so I don't get any of the storm. I'll just be like, I smiled and nodded, but I didn't agree with anything you said.
Yeah, you didn't agree. You're safe. Yeah. And I can be attacked because I'll just go back to Cambodia. So
those are escape to Cambodia.
Yeah, I love it there. Anyway, that's it for our today's first podcast. And we'll go
I
here.
think that'd be good.
Okay.
This is perfect.
Okay, how do we now turn it off?
Okay.
It's like those old guys looking, how do I do it?
Yeah. Stop recording and then
we'll create a base for learning and understanding. And then we'll get into techniques and ideas that as a dyslexic and ADD person, what you can do to avoid, you're never going to avoid, people are going to attack you, as we were talking about, but things that you can really know in your heart of hearts, so it'll keep you on course. So you won't quit, you know?
Yeah.
So you won't quit. And I just recorded that.
Podcast. No.
You're excused, 'cause you're always late, overweight, and totally